The marble halls of the Supreme Court buzzed with tension earlier this morning. Reporters crammed the gallery, their whispers drowned by the rustle of black robes as the 9 justices took their seats. At the center of the storm stood Karoline Leavitt, the youngest White House press secretary in history, her sharp blue eyes scanning the room. At just 28, she was no stranger to scrutiny, having risen swiftly through political ranks with a blend of charisma and intellect. But today was different. Today, she faced the full weight of the nation's highest court, accused of contempt for her biting critique of a recent 5-4 ruling on executive privilege. The case had erupted weeks earlier when Leavitt, during a press briefing, called the decision a dangerous overreach that undermines democratic accountability. Her words, delivered with the confidence of a seasoned litigator, sparked outrage among legal scholars and prompted Justice Amy Coney Barrett to summon her to explain why she shouldn't be held in contempt. The move was unprecedented, a direct clash between the executive branch and the judiciary, and the nation watched, riveted. Could a press secretary, barely a decade out of college, withstand the intellectual firepower of the Supreme Court? Leavitt stood alone at the podium, her tailored navy suit a stark contrast to the sea of black robes. Chief Justice John Roberts, his voice measured but firm, opened the proceedings. "Ms. Leavitt, your statements have been interpreted as an attack on this court's integrity. Contempt is a serious charge. How do you plead?" The room fell silent, every eye fixed on the young woman who seemed unfazed by the gravity of the moment. She adjusted her stance, her expression resolute, and leaned into the microphone. "Not guilty, Your Honor. My words were not an attack but a defense of the Constitution, protected by the First Amendment." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Justice Barrett, her gaze piercing, leaned forward. "You called our ruling dangerous, Ms. Leavitt. Do you deny that such language risks eroding public trust in this institution?" The question was a gauntlet, thrown with the precision of a jurist known for her intellectual rigor. Leavitt didn't flinch. "With respect, Justice Barrett, public trust is earned through accountability, not silence. My critique was grounded in legal reasoning, not personal animus." She paused, letting her words settle. "If I may, I'd like to present my analysis." The audacity of her request stunned the room. A press secretary, not even a lawyer, daring to engage the Supreme Court in a substantive legal debate? Chief Justice Roberts raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Proceed, Ms. Leavitt, but be mindful of your position." Leavitt opened a slim folder, her notes meticulously organized, and began. She cited Marbury v. Madison, arguing that judicial review itself invited scrutiny. She referenced Justice Scalia's dissents, known for their sharp critiques, to underscore that robust debate strengthened, not weakened, the judiciary. Her voice was steady, her arguments crisp, weaving historical precedent with First Amendment doctrine. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson interjected, her tone skeptical. "You're not a justice, Ms. Leavitt. What qualifies you to challenge our reasoning?" Leavitt met her gaze. "I'm a citizen, Your Honor, with a right to speak on matters of public concern. The First Amendment doesn't require a law degree." The gallery stirred, some nodding, others shaking their heads. Justice Brett Kavanaugh, known for his defense of free speech, scribbled notes, his expression unreadable. As Leavitt spoke, the atmosphere shifted. What began as a reprimand started to feel like a seminar. Her analysis was not the reckless rhetoric of a political operative, but the reasoned critique of a constitutional scholar. She quoted Alexander Hamilton from Federalist No. 78, arguing that judicial independence thrived on open discourse, not enforced deference. Even Justice Clarence Thomas, famously silent, leaned forward, his eyes narrowing with interest. But the tension remained. Justice Barrett, unswayed, pressed harder. "Your role as press secretary amplifies your words, Ms. Leavitt. Do you not bear a heightened responsibility to avoid inflaming division?" Leavitt's response was swift. "My Responsibility is to the truth, Justice Barrett, and to the people who expect their government to be accountable. The words hung in the air, a challenge wrapped in principle. The clock ticked past noon, and Chief Justice Roberts called a recess, his gavel echoing like a thunderclap. As Leavitt stepped away from the podium, reporters scrambled to their phones, the story already breaking across networks. A young press secretary had turned a contempt hearing into a constitutional showdown, but the justice's verdict loomed. Would her boldness earn her respect or seal her fate? The Supreme Court chamber crackled with unease as the recess ended. Karoline Leavitt returned to the podium, her face a mask of determination, while reporters, still buzzing from her morning performance, hushed their chatter. The nation's eyes were glued to screens, from coffee shops to Capitol Hill, as the 28-year-old press secretary faced a bench of justices poised to decide her fate. Her bold defense had shifted the hearing's tone, but the specter of contempt hung heavy. Could she maintain her footing against the sharpest legal minds in the land? Chief Justice John Roberts, his expression inscrutable, resumed the proceedings. Ms. Leavitt, your arguments on free speech are noted, but we must address the charge at hand. Your words targeted this court's legitimacy. Convince us they do not constitute contempt. His tone was a warning, a reminder that her eloquence, however impressive, might not shield her from consequences. Leavitt nodded, her hands steady as she opened her notes. Thank you, Your Honor. I'll demonstrate that my critique was not only lawful, but necessary for democratic discourse. Before she could continue, Justice Samuel Alito leaned forward, his voice cutting. You speak of democracy, Ms. Leavitt, yet your role serves a political agenda. Are we to believe your words were not calculated to provoke? The question was a jab, implying her critique was mere grandstanding. Leavitt's eyes flashed, but her voice remained even. Justice Alito, my role demands I communicate the administration's stance. My critique was rooted in constitutional principle, not partisan theater. I cited specific flaws in the ruling's logic. Shall I elaborate? The gallery held its breath. Alito's lips tightened, but he gestured for her to proceed. Leavitt launched into a dissection of the executive privilege ruling, arguing it overstepped precedent set by United States versus Nixon. She quoted the 1974 decision, noting its balance between presidential power and public accountability. This court has long held that no branch is above scrutiny, she said, her voice rising with conviction. My comments echoed that principle, not defiance. Her words were a tightrope walk, respectful yet unyielding. Justice Sonia Sotomayor, her gaze intense, interjected. You're articulate, Ms. Leavitt, but your platform amplifies your influence. Did you consider the risk of inciting distrust in our institutions? The question probed Leavitt's intent, testing whether her youth betrayed recklessness. Leavitt paused, choosing her words carefully. Justice Sotomayor, distrust festers when debate is stifled. My aim was to foster discussion, not division. The public deserves transparency, not blind faith in any institution. The exchange drew a nod from Justice Neil Gorsuch, who had been silent until now. Let's assume your speech is protected, he said, his tone measured. Where's the line, Ms. Leavitt? When does criticism become contempt? The question was a trap, inviting her to define a boundary that could ensnare her. Leavitt met his gaze. Contempt requires intent to obstruct justice, Justice Gorsuch. My intent was to engage, not obstruct. I welcomed this hearing as a chance to clarify my position. Her response drew murmurs from the gallery, where legal analysts scribbled furiously. Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who had summoned Leavitt, now took the reins. You've argued your case well, Ms. Leavitt, but words have consequences. Your critique was public, pointed, and from a position of authority. Why should we not hold you accountable for its impact? Barrett's tone was calm, but unyielding. Her question, a reminder of the power imbalance. Leavitt straightened, her voice steady. Justice Barrett, accountability cuts both ways. This court holds the power to interpret the Constitution, but the people hold the right to question those interpretations. My words were sharp because the stakes are high. Suppressing them would chill the very debate that strengthens our system. The room felt electric, her defiance tempered by logic. Even Justice Clarence Thomas, ever stoic, raised an eyebrow. As Leavitt concluded, a hush fell. She had turned the hearing into a master class, but the justices' faces betrayed little. Chief Justice Roberts called for a brief pause to confer, and the gavel fell. Leavitt stepped back, her heart pounding as whispers erupted. Outside, social media exploded with clips of her exchanges, some hailing her as a hero, others decrying her audacity. The justices retreated to deliberate, leaving one question burning. Would they punish her courage or concede her point? The Supreme Court chamber felt like a pressure cooker as the justices returned from their brief conference. Karoline Leavitt stood at the podium, her pulse racing beneath her composed exterior, aware that the nation was dissecting her every word. The 28-year-old press secretary had transformed a contempt hearing into a constitutional crucible. But the justices' stony expressions offered no clue to their leanings. Social media raged outside with hashtags pitting Leavitt's courage against judicial overreach. The question lingered. Would her audacious defense sway the court or provoke its wrath? Chief Justice John Roberts, his voice a low rumble, resumed the session. Ms. Leavitt, your arguments are compelling, but we must weigh their implications. Your role amplifies your words' impact. Are you prepared to accept the consequences if we find them contemptuous? The question was a blade, sharp and deliberate, testing her resolve. Leavitt's jaw tightened, but her gaze held steady. Your Honor, I stand by my words because they serve the Constitution, not personal gain. If consequences follow truth, I'm prepared to face them. The gallery stirred, a mix of admiration and disbelief rippling through. Justice Elena Kagan, her eyes narrowing, leaned forward. You frame this as principle, Ms. Leavitt, but your critique was delivered on a national stage. Was it not meant to rally political support rather than engage in legal discourse? The accusation stung, suggesting Leavitt's motives were more performative than pure. Leavitt's response was swift, her voice edged with conviction. Justice Kagan, my platform is my duty, not a stage. I spoke to inform the public, not to curry favor. The ruling's flaws demanded discussion, not silence. Kagan's lips pursed, but she didn't press further. Instead, Justice Brett Kavanaugh, known for his free speech advocacy, took up the thread. Let's explore that duty, Ms. Leavitt. You cited Nixon and Marbury, but your words could be seen as challenging our authority, not just our reasoning. How do you distinguish the two? His tone was probing, inviting her to clarify or stumble. Leavitt seized the opportunity, her voice clear. Authority is not immunity, Justice Kavanaugh. Challenging reasoning strengthens the court's legitimacy by holding it to its own standards. My critique respected your authority while questioning its application. Her precision drew a nod from Kavanaugh, but Justice Amy Coney Barrett, the architect of this showdown, wasn't satisfied. Respect is a fine word, Ms. Leavitt, but your tone was confrontational. You called our ruling dangerous. How is that not a direct attack on our integrity? Barrett's voice was calm, but her eyes burned with intensity, daring Leavitt to falter. The young press secretary didn't blink. Justice Barrett, dangerous described the ruling's impact, not your character. I analyzed its departure from precedent. Specifically, its expansion of executive privilege beyond established limits. Respect doesn't mean agreement. The exchange was a verbal duel, each thrust and parry watched by a rapt audience. Justice Neil Gorsuch, ever the textualist, interjected. You lean heavily on the First Amendment, Ms. Leavitt, But even protected speech has limits. Incitement, defamation. Why should your critique not cross that line? The question was a legal landmine, and Leavitt navigated it carefully. My words incited debate, not disorder, Justice Gorsuch. They defamed no one, only challenged a decision. The First Amendment shields criticism precisely because democracy thrives on it. The room felt charged, as if the air itself carried the weight of her words. Justice Clarence Thomas, silent but attentive, scribbled a note, his rare engagement signaling the gravity of the moment. Chief Justice Roberts, sensing the escalating intensity, shifted the focus. Ms. Leavitt, let's consider precedent. You've referenced Scalia's dissents. Are you suggesting your role as press secretary equates to a justice's right to critique? The question was a trap, implying overreach. Leavitt's response was measured. No, Your Honor, I claim only the right of a citizen to speak. Scalia's dissents show that sharp critique, even within this court, serves justice, not undermines it. As she spoke, the justices exchanged glances, their thoughts unreadable. The gallery buzzed with whispered speculation, and outside, news. Anchors debated whether Leavitt was a prodigy or a provocateur. Chief Justice Roberts raised a hand, signaling another pause. We'll recess to deliberate further. The gavel fell, and Leavitt exhaled, her composure unbroken but her mind racing. The justices filed out, leaving her alone with the weight of their impending decision. Had she pushed too far, or was she on the cusp of a historic victory? The Supreme Court chamber hummed with anticipation as the justices re-entered, their robes sweeping the floor like a silent verdict. Karoline Leavitt, alone at the podium, felt the weight of every stare, reporters, analysts, and the nation watching live. Her heart thudded, but her face betrayed nothing. At 28, she had turned a contempt hearing into a constitutional battleground, her sharp arguments forcing even the most skeptical justices to listen. Now, as the gallery hushed, the moment of truth loomed. Would the court applaud her courage, or crush her defiance? Chief Justice John Roberts, his voice steady, addressed the room. Ms. Leavitt, your defense has been thorough, but we must clarify the boundaries of your actions. Contempt hinges on intent. Convince us your words were not meant to undermine this court. The challenge was clear. One misstep could tip the scales against her. Leavitt gripped her notes, her voice firm. Your Honor, my intent was to uphold the Constitution's promise of open debate. Undermining the court would silence the very discourse it exists to protect. Justice Sonia Sotomayor, her expression stern, cut in. Intent is one thing, Ms. Leavitt, but effect is another. Your words fueled public outrage. How do you justify the chaos they caused? The question was pointed, tying Leavitt's speech to protests outside the court. Leavitt met her gaze. Justice Sotomayor, my words sparked debate, not chaos. Citizens protested because they care about this court's rulings. Stifling me would fuel distrust, not quell it. Her tone was resolute, refusing to concede fault. The gallery murmured, and Justice Samuel Alito, ever skeptical, seized the moment. You speak of debate, Ms. Leavitt, but your critique was personal. You singled out the court's reasoning as dangerous. That's not discourse, it's accusation. Or, his words were a challenge, daring her to back down. Leavitt didn't hesitate. Justice Alito, I critiqued the ruling, not the justices. Dangerous described its precedent-shifting scope, as I detailed with Nixon and Marbury. Accusing me of personal attack misreads my purpose. Her rebuttal was razor-sharp, and even Alito paused, his pen hovering. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, her voice measured, pressed further. You're not a lawyer, Ms. Leavitt. Your role is to communicate, not litigate. Why should we treat your critique as legal analysis rather than political rhetoric? The question probed Leavitt's credibility, a reminder of her youth. Leavitt's response was unflinching. Justice Jackson, The Constitution belongs to every citizen, not just lawyers. My analysis drew from precedent and principle, not politics. I'm here to defend my right to speak, not my resume. The exchange electrified the room, her audacity tempered by logic. Justice Amy Coney Barrett, whose summons had sparked this firestorm, leaned forward, her tone icy. Ms. Leavitt, you've argued well, but your position amplifies your responsibility. By criticizing us publicly, you risk eroding the court's authority. Why should we not hold you to a higher standard? Barrett's words were a gauntlet, testing Leavitt's resolve. Justice Barrett, my position amplifies my duty to speak truthfully, Leavitt replied. A higher standard doesn't mean silence. It means clarity. My critique aimed to strengthen the court by engaging its reasoning, not defying its authority. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Justice Neil Gorsuch, his eyes narrowing, posed a final challenge. Let's say we agree your speech is protected. What stops others from using your example to attack the court without consequence? The question was a legal puzzle, probing the broader implications. Leavitt's voice was steady. Justice Gorsuch, protecting my speech sets a precedent for reasoned critique, not reckless attacks. The line is clear. Debate strengthens. Obstruction weakens. My words chose the former. Her clarity drew nods from some in the gallery, but the justices' faces remained unreadable. Chief Justice Roberts, sensing the session's intensity, called for a brief pause. We'll take a moment to confer. The gavel fell, sharp and final. Leavitt stepped back, her mind racing as whispers erupted around her. Outside, newsrooms buzzed with analysis, some calling her a trailblazer, others a renegade. The justices' closed-door deliberation held the key to her fate. Would they see her as a defender of liberty or a threat to their sanctity? The Supreme Court chamber was a cauldron of suspense as the justices filed back in, their expressions as impenetrable as the marble walls. Karoline Leavitt, standing resolute at the podium, felt the weight of the moment. Her heart pounded, but her eyes were steady, fixed on the 9 figures who held her fate. At 28, she had turned a contempt hearing into a constitutional reckoning, her arguments forcing the court to confront the limits of its own authority. Now, as the gallery fell silent and cameras zoomed in, the nation awaited the verdict that would define her legacy. Chief Justice John Roberts, his voice grave, addressed the room. Ms. Leavitt, your defense has tested the boundaries of free speech and judicial respect. We've deliberated carefully. Before we rule, do you have final remarks? The question was unexpected, a last chance to sway or sink herself. Leavitt took a breath, her voice clear. Your Honors, I spoke to defend the Constitution's promise of open debate. If my words challenged this court, it was to strengthen, not diminish, its role in our democracy. I stand by them. Justice Amy Coney Barrett, whose summons had ignited this drama, leaned forward, her gaze piercing. You've argued passionately, Ms. Leavitt, but passion can blur lines. Your critique risked public trust. Why should we not find that contemptuous? The challenge was sharp, a final test of Leavitt's conviction. Justice Barrett, Leavitt replied, public trust hinges on truth, not silence. My critique was reasoned, grounded in precedent. Punishing it would chill the discourse this court exists to uphold. Her words were a dare, wrapped in principle. The gallery held its breath. Justice Samuel Alito, his skepticism unyielding, spoke next. You claim to uphold discourse, Ms. Leavitt, but your words stirred division. How do you reconcile that with your duty? His tone was accusatory, implying recklessness. Leavitt's response was unflinching. Justice Alito, division is the cost of democracy. My duty is to speak truthfully, not to pacify. My words invited debate, not destruction. Her clarity silenced the room, even Alito pausing to consider. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, her expression softening, posed a different angle. Ms. Leavitt, you've shown remarkable acumen for someone outside the legal profession, but your youth raises questions. Was this a calculated risk to elevate your profile? The question probed motive, a subtle jab at ambition. Leavitt met her gaze. Justice Jackson, my youth is no mask for calculation. I spoke from conviction, not for fame. The Constitution doesn't discriminate by age. A murmur of approval rippled through the gallery. Chief Justice Roberts raised a hand, signaling the end of questions. We've heard enough. This court has reached a decision. The room froze, every eye on him. Ms. Leavitt, your critique was sharp, your platform amplifying its reach. Contempt requires intent to obstruct justice. We find no such intent. By a vote of 9-0, we dismiss the charge of contempt. The gavel fell, and a collective gasp erupted. Leavitt exhaled, her composure cracking for the first time, relief flooding her features. Roberts continued, his tone measured. Your arguments, Ms. Leavitt, have reminded us that robust debate is the lifeblood of democracy. This court affirms your right to criticize our decisions, provided it respects the rule of law. The words were a landmark, a rare acknowledgement from the bench. Justice Barrett, her expression softened, added, Your acumen has earned our respect. Continue to wield it wisely. The nod from Barrett, once her accuser, was a turning point, transforming Leavitt from defendant to exemplar. The gallery erupted in whispers, reporters scrambling to broadcast the ruling. Outside, social media exploded, hailing Leavitt as a constitutional champion. Legal scholars debated the decision's implications, noting its affirmation of free speech against judicial overreach. Leavitt stepped from the podium, her head high, as colleagues and supporters mobbed her with congratulations. The hearing, meant to reprimand, had instead elevated her into a national figure. In the weeks that followed, Leavitt's example reshaped discourse. Law schools reported a surge in applications, especially from young women inspired by her poise and intellect. The White House, initially wary of her boldness, embraced her as a voice of principle. The ruling sparked a broader dialogue between the executive and judiciary, emphasizing mutual accountability. Leavitt, now a respected constitutional voice, continued her work, her youth no longer a liability, but a beacon. The showdown had not just cleared her name, it had redefined the power of a single voice in a democracy.